go for it. Welcome back to season 2. Not welcome back to season 2, I guess, but hey, welcome back to SENSI. If you haven't been here before, my name is Shay. I am your host. That sounds so generic and podcasty with a capital P, and that's not really my jive, but hey, if you've never been here before, my name is Shay. I'm the host. I am the person that writes, edits, records, does all the things, because this is just basically a form of journaling for me. That's basically how this podcast started. So welcome to season 2 of SENSI, the Steeze, where season 1 was all about the stereotype. It was literally sensitivity and the stereotype, because I was elucidating all the aspects of this, not maybe all, but a great deal of the experiences of living within the stereotype of the sensitive one, the oversensitive, the sensitive person. And now we're going to move on to the Steeze, which is all about the cool fucking things about it and all that it can do for you. If you've never heard of the word Steeze before, it's a person's distinctive way of doing things. The word originated in 80s hip hop, which I think is actually when hip hop originated, but a gorgeous word. I love that word. But anyway, I chose this because, well, actually, it was just really taken. I was listening to a Benny song, and she uses the word Steeze, and I loved it. I never forgot about it. It really left an impression on me. The word feels really juicy to me. So here we are, season 2, the Steeze. I chose it because there is so much richness in our experiences and our inclinations as sensitive people, and I don't think that that's given light or given attention or given words. There's maybe, I think, a lack of discussion around it. And because last season I talked to you about how a lot of times it's very vague when people, thank you or congratulate you or whatever for being a sensitive person. It's very vague, and I want to make it not vague. I want to make it very clear. So last season ended with the episode Sensitivity and Rupture, I believe, where I really talked about how the experience of breaking open and how terrifying it can be, and how that's kind of what we're left with in this experience, especially of the stereotype. It's like we're constantly facing rupture, we're constantly breaking open, we're constantly being wounded, and the wound that we have is being irritated. It's just, we can never heal, we can never grow, we're just stuck in living in a circle, and that it doesn't have to be that way. So episode 1 of season 2 is about Rapture. Its sensitivity is Rapture. What is the other half of this? If in the season 1 I determined the aspects of living in the stereotype, how they felt, our lived experience within it and what it meant and the validity in it, but the limitations of it as well, and then what other people are doing outside of us that's impacting us, what responsibility they do or don't have, why we receive it the way they do, why we receive it the way we do, why other people maybe don't understand it, the validity in their perspective, and so on. And then coming to the end of how all of this really comes to play with our sense of identity, and how other people or ourselves help secure this sense of identity that's actually really harmful for us, and how we can, if we can, recognize the limitations of this experience, we can then begin to build a framework for what's outside of that framework and what's outside of that existence of the stereotype. So this season I am beginning with sensitivity and rapture, which is that other side. How does that other side feel? What is the point of meeting that rupture? Is it just pain and pain and pain? Is it just death after death after death? Or is there some sort of conclusion? Is there an aftermath? Is there a reunion? Is there something beautiful on the other side? Because our lived experience states otherwise. So that is what I'm bringing to this episode. So season 1 of SENSI was about a liberation from silence. So I really imagine season 1 as a cord cutting, and we are breaking free by pointing to the things that hurt, that felt nonsensical, that felt unfair, and giving them words, giving them names, giving them reasons. The things that made us feel powerless and weak and stupid, the things that taught us that we weren't worth recognition or appreciation, were the things that taught us that we had nothing of value to offer. We are admitting, in the process of doing that and naming these things, we were admitting, this is what I am experiencing, this is really happening, and it hurts. Really admitting, it hurts me, this hurts. Because there's a lot of power in that. When you stop denying reality, even though we're so scared to, because reality can hurt, when we stop denying reality, we have the opportunity to soften into the real lived present moment, so that we can let ourselves be made anew, or maybe beginning to pave the way for something new, a new identity, a new framework. But that doesn't change the fact that it feels like dying. That is rupture. It feels like dying, and that is why we avoid it. You're wounded, and the instinct is to protect yourself and to pull back and to close off, even if it's not a literal death, right? It's an ego death. It's the symbolic death of what we think we know, or how we view things, or who we think we are, and the value we think we have. And oftentimes it's also a death of our images of other people as well. The way I worded it here is, it dethrones our worldview, which just feels like a horrible thing to do, because everyone clings to their worldview. What's the word? I'm not gonna think of it, it's fine. It's like ninth grade social class. Ideologies? Is that the word that I'm thinking of? Maybe. But we cling to these ideas we have of how things work and where we belong in relation to other people, because it helps build security. It makes things feel safe, and then makes things feel certain in an uncertain world. I feel like that's a quote from something. But what is lacking in here, though, is that we don't have a positive view of death. People are very terrified of death, because I think death really touches on one of those core beliefs that I quoted from Psycho-Cybernetics last season, which was that people believe they should not suffer indignities, and we deeply, deeply view death as an indignity. So I think it's important to add some nuance back into our concept of death, because maybe it will make rupture feel a little less scary, because we'll know that it's not an end. It's not the end. So I've been reading a book called Myths and Stories of the Wild Woman Archetype by Clarissa Pinkola Estes. And she talks about how we view death as a human figure that carries a weapon and hunts down the unsuspecting and the undeserving, and leaves like a pile of mutilated corpses in its wake. And it feels assaulting and terrifying and out of our control. But she mentions how we don't see how it is an essential creation pattern. Death is a part of an essential creation pattern. To quote her directly, she says, "In much Western culture, the original character of the death nature has been covered over by various dogmas and doctrines until it is split off from its other half, life. We have erroneously been trained to accept a broken form of one of the most profound and basic aspects of our nature. We have been taught that death is always followed by more death. It is simply not so. Death is always in the process of incubating new life." And I think that that's a beautiful thing to sit on. Death is always in the process of incubating new life, because whether we can consciously recognize it, or it's just an emotional reactionary belief or association, we avoid any sort of death because it feels like an ending. We view it as darkness, as coldness, as loneliness, as pain, as nothingness, as loss, as a prison sentence, as cruel and unusual and unnecessary, something we can't grasp and something we can't control. It's just a negative thing. But to reframe death as always the process of incubating new life, death being possibility, and death being fertile soil, and death being food, that helps life blossom and grow and be voluptuous and plump and colorful and beautiful, that without death there could be no life, there would only be death. Like, do you know what I mean? Like, if we can reconnect these ideas so it doesn't just feel, so they feel complementary rather than opposites. So I really liked specifically how she said split off from its other half. I thought that was incredibly relevant, because I haven't re-listened to the last episode of last season, so I can't say for sure, but I'm like pretty positive that I talked about how rupture and rapture are two halves of the same thing. They create a whole. Together they are whole, but separated they are fragmented. And we avoid rupture because it feels like death, and death is a negative thing to us, but by doing this we never get to experience rapture. So that wording, as I was reading the book and it specifically used those words, split off from its other half, I thought that was really relevant to this. That they have been separated. They're not separate things, they have been separated. And this separation causes so much pain because we all get that initial opening, that initial breaking open, but we never get anywhere to land. And that feels scary, and that feels more aligned with the death that we know. Death as we know it. The opening, the breaking open, the being vulnerable with no reception, nowhere safe. There is no being caught. There is no counterbalance. There is no coming home. There is no reunion. That's just an opening, a harm, an unknown, a lack of control. That's it. And then we don't get to have the full experience. And like I quote, I think it was in the crying episode last season, we don't trust ourselves because we've never been able to have the full experience and know that it ends. We don't trust rupture because we've never had that full experience to know that not just that it ends, but that it becomes something new. It's not just a death and ending. It is a rebirth into something new, and it is beautiful. When we don't know that something can end or that it will end, we never soften into it. And when we never soften, we don't get to know ourselves, we don't get to experience rapture. So a really important point that I want to make and that I really want you to take with you is that rupture is not what fragments you. With the way we view death and the pain that we experience in that rupture, we think that that is what breaks us, that is what fragments us, that is what we want to avoid, because that is the suffering, that is the pain, that is the breaking apart, that is the destruction. Rupture is not what fragments you. Ambivalence is. That which pulls you in multiple directions, indecision, trying to control everything, trying to do everything right, trying to anticipate everything. But rupture doesn't break you. In fact, it is in rupture, and I feel inclined to say that it is only through rupture that you realize that your center can hold. And that is a gift. That is such a gift. That's where you get to know what you're made of. We build up pretenses every day when we interact with people and have duties upon us and have to minimize our own experience to keep going and do the things that are, before us to get done. And I imagine it like pieces of armor, and that experience, it's almost like magnetizes into you, and then you got armor, and your armor just keeps piling up and it gets thicker and thicker, and it protects you and it helps you be useful day to day. But then in the experience, like, I almost feel like you become less human. And it is a burden, right? It carries weight. It gets heavier and heavier with every piece of armor that's added. And how I'm imagining rupture is like a storm. And I really need to dictate this, because every time I'm thinking of rupture, I imagine a storm, like a tornado, a hurricane. I'm imagining something like that every time. So I really want to dictate that analogy really specifically, because it comes up all the time. But for now, I'll just say I'm imagining like a knight covered in armor, and then the storm comes around and it pulls it off piece by piece. It's ripping the armor off and it's being swept away. And we view this as taking our protection away. We are exposed, we are vulnerable, it's dangerous, rather than that this is an opportunity to see what's underneath. This is an opportunity to see what we are held together by, which is your center, right? Again, another thing I quoted last season, and I think from Psycho-Cybernetics, that intarnishable center, and losing anything that is peripheral to it. And I just want to sit on this and repeat it a bunch of times, because I find this in my lived experience to be so true and to have such value. What feels like dying, what feels like losing everything you know and hold dear, isn't it at all. We come to identify with these pieces of armor like that is what we are. These identity markers and I am statements and our values and just signifiers of any sort are each a little piece of metal of the armor. And when a storm comes and we're so scared to lose these things, when you're holding on to them and you don't let them go, it's like the wind keeps smacking this armor back at you and the metal cuts you, and that is what hurts you, right? It's the resistance. But what actually happens when you succumb to it, when you allow it, is that all of these fragments that were never actually you, they were representations of you, are swept away in the wind. You then get to see and remember who you are. You get to see your center, what is intarnishable. The things outside the armor, they are not intarnishable. They are absolutely tarnished. They are done with. They are in the wind. And we get very attached to them, so it is concerning, but our center is not what breaks. We lose anything that's peripheral to it, and we come to know and come to remember who we actually are. You come to know what your center is, what you're made of, by what is steadfast through every rupture. That is how I view it. So the more you rupture in life, the more you get to know what you're made of. And any cuts or bruises or pain that you do experience in this process, because we're alive and we're human, it pales in comparison to the resolve you feel after the fact. This isn't just a losing everything you hold dear, it's you losing the idea of the things that you hold dear. It's not the things, it's the idea of the things. It's not what you hold dear, it's your idea of what you hold dear. It's like a rigidity of the mind that you are losing is how it really is. At least in my experience, that's how it is. And the more you cling to these identity markers, the more it hurts, and the more you're weighed down, and the more stuck you feel, and the more you're stuck in rupture. Because it's like the story, it's like it has to, right? Like the natural cycle of life and death. This has to die for something new to come from it. And the more you resist that, the more you're like on a symbolic life support, is how it feels. You give up the richness and the mutability of real lived life in favor of what you've known, what's known. So knowing anything that you're losing and anything that you're terrified of not having anymore, and you don't know who you are without it, or what it means, or how you'll appear, or what value you'll have to who and what and whatever, you are deeper than those things. That is what I'm trying so hard to poop out right now. Anything that you're terrified of losing, that is all actually peripheral to who you actually are. Can you sit on that for a moment? In those moments where life changes are happening and you're so scared and you're so sad or angry, whatever it is, and you're holding tight to things, just imagine letting go of your associations to these things. What you think is the source of life and love to you, letting them go. What is in you, and like, I don't even know how to describe it. It is so much deeper, and it is so much broader than all of these things. And it's funny because we are afraid of losing these things, or it's like it's disloyal of us to let these things go, when really we are clinging to the representations of a thing and not the thing itself. Like, this is what I have found in my experience of this sort of thing, is that when you let go of what you think you have to hold on to, they are actually closer than they were before, if they matter, right? And a lot of times they do. There are things that we don't even realize don't matter that we're holding on to because we can't differentiate between them. But what I found is that when you let go of the clinging and you let go of the image or the idea of what it means to be loyal, and you let things lie, you realize that they weren't actually the heart of the thing. They weren't what carried it. It was deeper. Like, if something truly matters to you, or someone truly matters to you, the representations of a thing are not the heart of it. You can lose them all. It isn't part of you. If something is truly valued by you, really, really wanted by you, relied on by you, It is deeper than the armor. It is within you, and it will be with you. You don't have to hold on. It's a part of you. You're not, there's no risk of losing it, is how it's felt to me. So again, for the hell of it, rupture is not what breaks you. It is in rupture. It is through rupture. It is allowing rupture. That is how you realize that your center can hold. And beyond that, it's not just that your center can hold, it's that you're actually seeing your center. You're getting to look at what is underneath the armor and the pretenses that we build up day to day, and we actually get to see ourselves. We get to see what we are held together by. We get to see what we are made of. We actually get to come to know that intarnishable center, that part of us that cannot be tarnished. And from this perspective, we realize that everything we were clinging to beforehand was not what we thought it was. It was actually all just peripheral to the heart of it. It wasn't the heart of it. Rupture, this feeling of death, is a gift, because it's only through this death or rupture that you come to know what your center truly is, what you're made of, by what is steadfast through every rupture. And the more ruptures you experience, which in my mind, I'm saying this because it'll help me meet those ruptures. The more ruptures I embrace, the more I get to know what I'm made of, the more I actually get to know who I am. And any cuts or bruises or pain that may happen in the midst of this change pales in comparison. It will pale in comparison to the resolve you feel after the fact, when you are in sync with your center and when you are in touch with that intarnishable center. That resolve that you feel, that sense of equilibrium, that sense of, even though it sounds funny, it's a sense of weightlessness while also being really, really rooted. And maybe those aren't opposites. I'm imagining like a tent being tethered. Or, you know, as someone with long hair, when you pull your hair back, you can tell when it's not equally distributed because it's pulling on strands, and when you pull your hair up and it's pulling evenly across your head from all your hair, right? It's this feeling of distribution, of feeling light and carried and safe and deeply, deeply rooted at the same time. And you feel intarnishable, and you feel impenetrable, and you feel steady, like this deep, deep sense of being steady and peace and calm, like that. And I know we all feel that. We've all had that in our lives. We've had those experiences where we're in the midst of something pain, and the aftermath is so calm. Our bodies feel calm. Our sense of identity feels calm. Our minds, you know, the words going on in our minds, they have calmed. Our body feels calm. Our breathing is calm. And we are not worried about anything because we have this perspective, this larger perspective of everything being okay, and that we are not so fragile that changes in our life will break us. Like, I'm really searching for a word here, guys, but I'm really just wasting time. I think that Inside Out 2 illustrates this rupture to rapture sequence perfectly. And I want to be clear, I don't want you, when I'm talking about this, I don't want you to be thinking about the emotions as distinct beings who control Riley, you know, in headquarters. I don't want you to think of them as emotions themselves. And, you know, I want to say it's from a psychoanalytical perspective, but when I've read books from psychologists, I never can remember what their, like, you know, background actually is. There's so many words. But I know in the Wild Woman book, as well as in the Uses of Enchantment, he talked about, specifically regarding fairy tales and other myths, that every character in a story just represents an aspect of a single person's psyche. At least this is a way of looking at it. And I thought this was fantastic. I thought this was so interesting. So every time you read a fairy tale or anything like that, every character within that story is actually just representing different facets of a single person's psyche. And I thought this was so beautiful for a lot of reasons, but also because, you know, you can hear a lot of talk about fairy tales and the happily ever after and the princess who gets saved by the Prince Charming and they get married and live happily ever after or whatever. But when you view it like this, as the female and the male, or feminine and masculine aspects of a single person's psyche reuniting, and almost again representing that intarnishable center or an integration. I think that is such a beautiful, beautiful way of looking at it. So I want you to keep that in mind, that these emotions, the emotions, joy, it's joy, sadness, anger, whoever, anxiety, that these are not the emotions themselves all in headquarters controlling Riley and she's a victim of it. They are facets of her identity, but she is still in control of all of them. They are just segmented aspects of Riley. Think of it like that. And another point that I want to make here is in Inside Out 2, the front runners are joy and anxiety. And if you view them not as the emotions themselves, bickering and fighting and causing pain within the person and they're a victim of it, you view them as representations of Riley fighting with herself. They are two facets of Riley representing the ambivalence going on in Riley. And what did I say earlier in this episode? That rupture isn't what breaks you, ambivalence is. In this movie, Riley needs to rupture, but she ignores it, right? She is rupturing, she's growing up, things are changing, and she's resisting it. She's resisting the unknown, and she's clinging to the aspects of her that she does know, that are reliable, that make her feel safe, that she leans on, and that create her reality and her identity, her sense of belonging, her sense of, safety, whatever, right? She needs to rupture. Her life is rupturing, but she ignores it. She won't let her experience be birthed through her. She's resisting this ego death. And you see this in moments like in the car with her friends, when she finds out that they won't be going to the same school as her. When she gets overexcited when she meets Val. When she gets in trouble from the coach in front of the team because her and her friends are goofing off. When she hears the other players complaining about her on the benches. When she doesn't make the team. All examples of her moments where she needs to rupture, is going to rupture one way or the other, whether you resist it or not, rupture is coming. But she doesn't allow herself to. She is avoiding rupture. She's denying her reality, and she gets disoriented, and this grows. This disorientation grows and grows and grows. This storm gets stronger and stronger and stronger. She thinks she needs to accomplish certain things or act in certain ways that is going to fix everything. Control. She's holding on rather than letting go. And she becomes so dysregulated to the point where she cannot hold it back any longer. Fragmentation is happening rather than integration. And she reaches the point where her world feels upside down, and she has to admit it. And that is something I think I talked about in last season, was you get to the point where you cannot resist it and you have to succumb. You feel like you have to give up. You shrug your shoulders. You say, what can I do? I'm fed up. I'm sick of this. What else can I do? Like a sense of helplessness. But it's funny because in this sense of helplessness or hopelessness, not always, but oftentimes it's actually just a moment of knowing that you're not in control. It's not actually like you have nothing, you're done for. It's just a feeling of, okay, I have no control. You're admitting that you have no control. You no longer have any option to deny the rupture. You've had your chances, you've denied it enough. It just isn't going anywhere anymore. And at this moment in the movie, Riley has a panic attack. And what happens? All of these suppressed memories come flooding back in that she's been running from, specifically over the last few weeks, but even, years. She is in the throes of rupture. Now, I don't think you have to meet this point to go through rupture, but when we are afraid of death and we're afraid of rupture and we deny, which is so much of what we're focusing on in the first season, how we're denying our reality and how this causes a rupture like this. It causes so much unnecessary pain. It's such a human experience. We do this so much because we are so fearful of death and we avoid it so much rather than embracing it. This almost becomes necessary, if that makes sense. It becomes unavoidable because of the way that we handle it. So Riley is in rupture, and in a rupture that's not going anywhere. She has no option at this point. So how is she going to handle it? And note that this can still go in multiple directions, right? Riley doesn't have to embrace it the way she does, right? There are a lot of ways still to handle it at this point. And I think a lot of the time when a lot of us come to this point where we can't deny it and we're in such a deep rupture, we just cling tighter to the rupture and make it a part of our identity. So once that initial attack that panic attack is over, we don't actually learn and integrate further there. We just use that as another, I don't want to say excuse, but another reason to avoid it, because it's dysfunction, it's scary, it's bad, it hurts, I don't want it. So rather than integrate, we actually just fragment more. But luckily, this movie is a positive example of how to handle this. So how does she handle it? How does Riley handle it as she's going through this panic attack, through this rupture on steroids? We go into the representations of Riley, and there they are again in HQ, all of her emotions. I think this is so beautiful here, right? There is a fragmentation here because some of the emotions are ejected, a great deal of them in the second movie are ejected from headquarters. And there's this fragmentation of her psyche. Rather than all the aspects working together, they are fragmented, they're separated, they're not working together any longer, and they get sent out, and Riley loses them. She doesn't have access to these things, and a few specific ones are in hyperdrive and controlling everything, and there's a lack of balance here. In this moment, you go back into headquarters, and now finally they are all back together. That fragmentation, here's an opportunity for there to be integration, right? All of the emotions, all the facets of her identity are back together. And Joy sees anxiety and tries to help, right? Rather than fighting against each other like they have been. Anxiety realizes that she's done wrong. She realizes that she can't do it on her own, that she needs help. And Joy, although feeling angry at first and tries to snatch up anxiety and can't, she still cannot control her. She softens and witnesses anxiety and tries to help her. And they finally listen to one another, and they see one another, and they realize their dependence on one another. And Riley, through the facet of sadness, calls Joy forward, the one that anxiety has been overpowering or tricking or pushing away, that Riley has been pushing away. She's called forward. And then Riley begins to tap into her internal experience again. And as soon as Joy, the one missing in this story, touches the controls, Riley softens. And you can see this on the outside by how her body starts to change. She begins to process. The backlog starts to, drip through, and it's not as clogged anymore. She admits her experience, she faces herself, and she's being vulnerable. And in this moment, her true friends, right, the people who truly know her and have been her friends for a long time, witness her. They see her and they come to her. And Riley faces her behavior. She witnesses herself honestly, without shame. She verbalizes her experience and takes ownership over him. She can name the emotions she felt and apologize. And after that, she comes out of the penalty box, literal and metaphorical, the literal penalty box in the movie, but also a metaphorical mental penalty box, and is immersed in her sensory, present moment experience again. And she can feel the things that she loves. Her skates on the ice, the hockey stick against the puck, her friend's presence and laughter, she taps in. And doing so, she consents to experience life again and the joy of being alive and feeling okay. And that is an experience of rapture. Getting to feel whole. You made it. You admit it, like I talked about last season. You admit your experience. You sense it. You look at it. You allow yourself to feel it wholly. You lay down that armor, right? And laying it down, which means you don't have to have it ripped off of you. You can choose to lay down the armor and relax. And this can be hard to pinpoint. It can be hard to find this moment and make sense of it. But a way I often think of is like, how do you bridge this moment? How can you get to that place where you can lay down your armor before you, lose control and you get into, whether it's a literal panic attack or just feeling in a state of hypervigilance all the time? How can you find that moment And that moment where that change happens, where you let your experience touch you, is the same in the moment where you have to get a needle and you're afraid and you're bracing, and then you have your arm in their hand or whatever, and you know it's coming, and you take that breath and you exhale knowing that it's coming, and you are succumbing, you are admitting to that moment. And then oftentimes there is that moment where when the needle is in your arm, you tense up again. And it's the same thing too, on a roller coaster, and you're at the top of the roller coaster, and you know the drop is coming, and you ease into it, you soften into it because you know it's coming, but then as you go down, your body tenses again. Or saying a hard no to someone, right? When you're a little bit scared, and you take that moment where you soften enough to be able to say no. And then in the moment, you know, you might tighten up again, and you're prepared for fight, you're prepared for resistance. But it was the opportunity that you gave yourself in that one moment of softening. It's like that quote that we've all heard a million times of, I don't know if I remember the whole thing, but it just takes 1 second of bravery. I think that applies here really beautifully as well. All it takes is 1 second. And of course, it's not just like a one and done. You're going to meet rupture after rupture after rupture in life, but the way to meet it and to help it process and integrate and move on is by softening. You resist, you resist, you resist, you make that conscious decision to soften into your experience. And then you might tense up again. But what happens in all of these things, a roller coaster, you know, not always saying no to someone, so that might not be the best example, but hopefully could be saying no to someone, getting a needle on a roller coaster. You soften, you admit that it's happening, you might brace again as things get more intense, but what do you find after that's over? The pain dims, the fear dims, the fear of the unknown slowly becomes known, and you realize that the reality of it actually wasn't what was scary, it was the fear of the thing. And you feel integration, you feel whatever it is processed, you feel your experience broaden again, the intensity lessens. And it wasn't as scary or as painful as you thought, and you actually feel so much better now. You feel braver, you feel more integrity, you feel, what did I say before? You feel untarnishable, you feel more resolve. You might not feel great, it might not be great, but you feel whole, and you feel more at ease and more capable and more clear-headed. All of this to say that in our attempt to avoid pain, what we're really doing is cheating ourselves out of that rapture. We want to avoid pain, but we don't just avoid pain. Like we can put off pain, but we don't just avoid pain. We end up living in pain. We end up living in a cycle of ruptures with no raptures, which is what season 1 really is about. Living in this stereotype is a perfect example of living in a cycle of ruptures with no raptures. Never getting to experience that integration, that growth, that peace. Never getting to experience that joy of being alive. We're just stuck in that penalty box, always waiting, isolated. Season 2 of SENSI is about breaking isolation. It's about coming out of the woodworks, out of the silence, out of the shame, out of the stereotype, and stepping into ourselves and finding wholeness through our sensitivity, as it should be. But before we get into all that, I would really like to talk about why is this podcast called SENSI? Is it just because it's like the prefix of sensitivity? Is it pronounced SENSI? SENSI, like the, you know, flameless candles? Like I had someone ask me that, which I mean, clearly you haven't listened to the podcast, if that's what you think, but whatever. It started because when I was initially making notes for this podcast, I was writing words like sensitive, sensible, sensory, sensitivity, oversensitive, things like that over and over and over and over and over again, to like the fact that it was nauseating. So it was like, if you just like shrunk everything down, like the most common characters are these, like this is basically what the whole podcast comes down to, is these 5 letters. But there are 2 reasons I chose to stick with this. One, because as I repeated it, because I was thinking too, like, what emphasis would I want to place on this? Do I like the way that this sounds? SENSI. And the more I repeated it, the more I heard I sense, as in I am sensing. And to me, that's like what I want to say, the identity, what the experience of being sensitive really comes down to. It comes down to sensing. And I thought that was beautiful, that I am sensing, because it made me think of the astrological archetypes, right? The 12, I wanted to say categories, the 12 houses, the 12 astrological signs, symbols, whatever, the archetypes, and how they have their I statements like I use, I am, I think, and how beautiful it is to have this for being the sensitive one. I sense. That's what it comes down to. I sense. And I thought that that was so powerful, because if season 1 is about the stereotype and it's the limitations of a stereotype and being stuck in that identity and the shortcomings of it and the pathetic attributes of it, what about the power of sensitivity? What about not the stereotype, but the archetype of the sensitive one? The I statement being, I sense. We know the stereotype, the one-dimensional, dehumanizing, cliche, dead end, right? We understand the stereotype. But what about a framework or a blueprint for a positive embodiment of who we are as sensitive people? What sort of idea or identity do we have, or image do we have to emulate or relate to? Right? If archetypes are symbols that cross time and space, that cross culture, because they're just deeply relevant in the human psyche, what is our archetype? What is it that we have to emulate or relate to? So rather than viewing this simple restrictive stereotype, what is this expansive, beautiful archetype that we have? And I hope that through this podcast, to build the image of the sensitive one rather than the oversensitive ones. Now, my second reason is because when I was playing with the word SENSI, I also was thinking about the word sensei, right? A teacher, a mentor, one that models and encourages self-reflection and patience and discipline, that encourages fortitude, resilience and accountability and service, just as your sensitivities are for you. And instantly, when viewed like this, from this framework, that your emotions, your sensitivities, your ability to sense, when viewed like this as a sensei, what once had no direction has direction, and it has a framework to fit inside of it. You have a map, you have an outline. So when you view it through this framework, every single time throughout your life that you have been faced with an emotion, would it not make sense to see it as a journey to take, or a challenge before you that you're an apprentice of, that you, the fumbling, inexperienced student, are misinterpreting and poorly executing? But they are lessons to be learned to help you grow and refine and overcome. If you viewed these sensitivities, these inclinations, these emotions, the intensity of energy that you have as a path, not as something that has no path and needs to be done away with, but as a path, as a duty, as a part of your destiny, if you want to see it like this, but that it is of service to take this on. It's not a shortcoming. It is of service for you to take this on, for you and others. You aid others through doing this. Through taking it on as a privilege, you grow your capacity to hold emotions and to hold experiences and to learn, and then to teach others. That this experience of your emotions and sensing and having to process what it is that you sense is a wisening process or a rite of passage rather than just an inconvenience to other people. And from this idea, from this framework, the way that we handle our emotions as something to be ashamed of, or to be shamed away, subdued, rejected, or just be done away with, makes absolutely no sense, unless we have no mentors to guide the way, unless that sort of wisdom was lost. the appreciation for what that sort of wisdom offers to a community or to a culture or to people is lost. And I think, at least for myself, maybe I can't speak for other people, but I find this to be very true in my life. When you don't have people before you who have embraced this journey, who have chosen to honor it and shown you what it looked like to honor it, to view it as a privilege, to watch someone work through that and become some sort of wizened teacher or a master of their emotions, right? But as a sage, not an enslaver. Someone who has not engaged just accidentally or inadvertently or haphazardly, only as much as they possibly have to, but have willingly undertaken this journey in all the facets of it to come out on the other side stronger and more powerful and more actualized. How would our experience dictated in the first season, how would that look different and be different, and how would we handle it differently? What impact would those things have on us if we had that sort of teacher, whether it be an actual person in our life or an archetype, rather than how we've experienced just floundering through life because there is nothing to model or mirror this for us. And all I can really say for this image, and I'm thinking the archetype, is that when I imagine a person who has become a wizened teacher, and I imagine it as a balance, it's interesting because I feel like from the stereotype, when you view sensitivity, you're often viewing someone who has no balance, who is prone to emotional outbursts and fits and melancholy and exuberance and sentimentality, and it's viewed as very imbalanced, irrational, and so on, rather than being like, when you can sense, and that I want to say is your proclamation, when you sense and sense all and weigh all equally, there's a great aspect of balance there. So that is a key part that really weighs on me when it comes to the archetype, but also when you view this person or this idea or this personification as someone who can hold all and hold all well, and not by not feeling, but by feeling deeply and intelligently. I imagine that this place of excellence or mastery is like a form of rapture, or it's the place where rupture and rapture are one again instinctively. So I don't know where that's going to take me, but since thinking of the archetype, I've been playing with the aspects of what I think that is, or what that looks like. And these are some appetizers of what I think that will become. So I hope to show you guys as I go on. But for now, welcome back to SENSI. I am so excited to start season 2. Unlike the last season where I started an episode just rambling and not really knowing what I was going for, and like had no idea what the podcast was going to be. And then a couple episodes and I was like, okay, cool, yeah, let's focus on sensitivity. It could be the stereotype suite. I think it's gonna be like 5 or 6 episodes in. I was like, okay, this is what the podcast is gonna be called, you know? And it just kind of slowly came together. And I did like 1 episode at a time, and then I record it and put it away until like weeks or a month later, and I'd record another one. I basically have the whole concept for this season mapped out already. And this is the first episode, and I'm airing it hopefully in the next couple days, rather than months from now like I did with the first season. It's going to be a different experience. But what I can say for sure is that this season, or with this show in general, but with this season, my goal is to show how sensitivity truly is an incredible resource that fuels our lives. Not just honorary recognition, which I think I mentioned at the beginning of this one, but I know I talked about last season, is when people try to say that it's beautiful that you're sensitive. It often comes across very patronizing or vague, right? It feels like a consolation prize, right? I don't want that. I don't want this to feel like an honorary recognition. I want to show you practically, specifically, and actionably how sensitivity can be the resource that can make or break our life. Because it can, and it gets to be, and I would say that it should be, all of these beautiful things as well. I will see you, or you will hear me next time for sensitivity and energy, part 1.